The Galactic Library held all knowledge. Humans used it for war plans. Peaceful alien scholars are horrified to discover that humanity's first use of universal knowledge is developing new ways to turn information into weapons. Over the course of its 12 million-year existence, the Galactic Library has been maintained by the Keepers of Orcs, nestled right in the crystalline heart of their own world. It existed both as a tangible structure and also in terms of quantum consciousness, which spanned dimensions. Its infinite halls contained every piece of knowledge to have ever existed, from life's first glimmer in the primitive mind until now, and including even concepts far too complex for still living men on our airplanes in lunar orbit to comprehend. As head librarian for the past 4 centuries, Zephyr 9 stretched out her elongated form in the traditional robes of silver light which staff members wore. Her species, the Vorthaki, first moved beyond the need for war eons ago in evolution. Pale blue skin seemed to shimmer with an inner luminescence, and the large dark eyes reflected years' worth of accumulated wisdom, intellect and compassion personified, the beings who so devotedly preserved and practiced knowledge their hearts like data crystals, as computers plugged into a flimsy printer, or the living beings they were. She inspired not only students, but also others of her kind, all tirelessly to set forth in pursuit on countless different paths. The library itself was a paradox of conventional architecture. Endless corridors of living light stretched off in all directions. Walls lined with data crystals, hummed with stored guides, ready to shed knowledge for those in need. Their wealth had no end at all, as if produced out of thin air. In this fashion, the wide, winsomely floating platforms carried visitors on through levels which existed simultaneously in higher dimensions multiple times over. They intuited perfectly the feeling of 1,000,000,000,000 civilizations whispering the air. Their stories and discoveries were woven into our very fabric until these factors became part of coarse dialectical materialism itself. For untold generations, species from across the galaxy had made pilgrimage to the library. The artistic and came with peace as their main goal. The logical Centauri sought proofs in mathematics that had eluded them for centuries. The spiritual and empathic Tauri were questing for some new framework of thought to explain their rapidly expanding awareness. Each species brought its own unique outlook on knowledge, but all shared a common reverence for the pursuit and reception of knowledge. They took us as food. ZEPHYRA-9 is the first to encounter humanity through diplomatic channels. Being a new species from a most backwater system to them called Sol, had recently managed faster than light travel. Their representative, Ambassador Rachel Morrison, had asked for an audience to discuss her kind's possible addition to the Galactic Knowledge Exchange. The request itself passed unnoticed. Dozens of species asked in every single century, and all who came with clean hands were welcomed by the Keepers. Scientific assessments issued had shown promise. Not only were humans, they argued, notably productive and inventive. Their art forms contained real emotional depths, and their science, though crude by galactic standards, bore all the marks of high-grade creative imagination. Most importantly, and very gratifying to those who cared about such things, was their apparent diversity of thought. No single ideology held sway over the species. This kind of openness to new concepts was highly valued by the Keeper's ambassador. Morrison herself seemed to embody many, if not all, of humankind's better traits. A woman of about 50, with graying hair and intelligent brown eyes. She spoke earnestly of her race, hungering for knowledge. As she first toured the library's outer chambers, She gazed with awe at floating data crystals and asked intelligent questions about preservation techniques for organic neural patterns. My people have always known that the key to progress is knowledge, Morrison told him as they walked through the Hall of First Discoveries, where each species' earliest breakthroughs were laid out on display. We have made terrible mistakes in the past, and mostly because we acted in ignorance. Access to this repository could help us avoid repeating other civilizations' errors. Zephyrinine felt in her heart that the ambassador was sincere. There was the kind of original enthusiasm one saw in young races happily discovering things about themselves for the first time, free of the skepticism that older peoples sometimes developed. After weeks of consultations with each member, the Council of Keepers finally agreed humanity should provisionally be permitted to access only the basic archives of the library. Here was where a ceremony took place to welcome humanity into the Galactic Knowledge Exchange, the vast central nexus. There were representatives present from every species that had ever joined, and probably future species as well, floating, perching, or squeezing themselves onto this great amphitheater of light were creatures in forms as diverse as imagination itself. The crystal walls showed pictures from human history, their first walk into space, the artistic creations by man and his scientific discoveries. With tears in her eyes, Ambassador Morrison received the symbolic crystal of access. This tiny pyramid of living data crystal enabled humanity to interface directly with the library's basic systems, so that they might draw benefit from what that great repository of knowledge and wisdom had gathered through its own long history. It was a great time for celebration, since now humanity would enter into the larger galactic society. In the name of humanity, said Morrison, her words reaching all corners of the chamber through an acoustic enhancement field, I swear that we will receive this precious gift with due reverence and responsibility. We know what knowledge means, and we will live up to that trust. All the assembled beings answered with harmonious chords of consent. Even the normally reserved crystalline hive mind of Rigel quite willingly gave approval. It looked as if humanity would blend perfectly into that peaceful community which had pursued knowledge openly for so long. The early months of human entry were exactly as expected. Scholars came from various human countries, bringing with them the most important texts in Confucian thought, astronomy, MMD, experimental physics. They were enthusiastic students, always asking questions and showing the same wide-eyed curiosity that Ambassador Morrison had done. Dr. Elena Baskis, a quantum physicist from the Earth's Lunar Research Station, spent weeks working on theoretical frameworks her species has only even glimpsed. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and even the ancient keepers found themselves smiling at her words. It's like being given the keys to the universe, Dr. Vasquez told Zephyrinine in one of their discussions. All my life I've been trying to grasp the fundamental nature of reality. Here, I can access insights from civilizations which solved these puzzles millions upon millions of years ago. Among the historical archives, the human researchers were particularly interested in the archives. Dr. Marcus Chen, a sociologist and anthropologist, was busy recording the rise and fall and guerrilla-like shifting in of galactic civilizations. He was particularly interested in how peace had been reached by different species, and they had gotten it to last like this. We are still learning how to live with ourselves. Dr. Chen confessed to Keeper Ultra 7 in the archive of social evolution. The long history of violence and strife is humanity's. Understanding how others rose above these impulses might make us a little bit more grown up as a species. For a moment, a shining instant, It seemed that humanity would proceed along the same route as myriad other species had in the past, using the library's knowledge to evolve beyond their primitive instincts and join the galaxy's community of enlightened beings. The keepers began to discuss establishing a permanent human research station within the library itself, something that is only offered to the most promising of new member species, reaching ahead and evolving in new ways. One student described his reaction by writing, "I had no idea things like this existed." The Chinese and Indians who commanded the coal industry were amazed to discover that their reports were not responding entirely as one would expect. Another warning ignored found its echoes throughout the palace. The chief guard in the Wei dynasty had detected signs of tampering with security protocols. This thesis also introduces the difficulties faced when balancing two yet vastly different text processing levels into Type L prospecting techniques. Level 1 text processing machine methods are actually carried out on a personal computer, which then sends signals up another line to one of two Level 2 machines where it is processed and corrected. After the invasion had failed in its main objective, Monitor 4 was cautious. This intrusion had its origins in human mathematics, the security officer explained to the council. But sophisticated bypass algorithms substitute techniques from our physics extended archive for routine paths of attack. The result is still our own knowledge sabotaging our barrier systems. Zephyrinine could feel her mind beginning to club together in dread. In the entire 12 million history of the library, no member species existed that was able to violate our archive security. The very idea was wrong out of everything libraries sought to encourage. Instead, knowledge should be used for illumination and positive purpose only. The council immediately shut off all human access to the library's systems. New measures were put into place, beginning from now, to foretell any intrusion attempts upon quantitative records and forecast their probable location. Their newest members weren't merely substantial cash raisers that brought in fresh ideas and energy, though both of these roles they quite certainly played. They represented the first infiltration attempt made against us by hostile Humania. Dr. Vasquez, the eager quantum physicist, had been using her position in advanced physics to create new forms of spaced weapons. Dr. Chen, who had been talking about a peaceful evolutionary movement, in fact was investigating certain species' martial arts and strategies before enlightenment. Even Ambassador Morrison, who spoke so beautifully about humanity's pursuit of peaceful wisdom and understanding, was in on it. The Keeper's investigation unveiled all the tricks that humans had played on him. If truth be told, the entire diplomatic mission had been put up by the United Earth Military Intelligence Division. This led to the corollary that every human who had gone into the library was either an operator for the military or a scientist in the military, serves or employed by someone who hires military contractors. They had not come as seeker of truth, but came as gatherer of knowledge, which might hereafter be used as a weapon for use in seeking truth. The evidence was both formidable and heartbreaking. Human researchers had been systemically noting down every form of military knowledge that they could lay hands on, comparing it with their own capacities to see where they could quickly get more of the same. They had also been studying the defense tactics of religious sects still at peace, seeking and exploiting any and all genotypic flaws. Naturally, they could go on about these realms forever. Why the odd thing carried on turning. What those patterns of common male behavior told them in themselves about political control on planets. hosting 9 billion citizens, if perhaps it concerned either genocide or mass cannon firing, then experts would be called in from our Science University labeling project just 2 streets away. Zephyrinine confronted Ambassador Morrison privately in her study, a place made of soft light and floating crystalline shapes where the head librarian only had the most delicate meetings. "We know," Zephyrinine said wearily. Her voice, normally so soft, was now a heavy and filled with disappointment. Morrison did not try to bluff away the facts. Instead, she leaned back in her chair with a small smile on her lips. The wonder and admiration that had accompanied everything she said earlier was gone entirely. She was all business now. "I suppose I should be impressed that you figured it out so quickly. I mean, although of course quickly is relative when you've been waiting for months." Zephyrinine asked, why, directly from the deepest part of her soul. Why would you twist the gift of knowledge like this? The library brings enlightenment and is intended for species to rid themselves of their primitive passions. We delivered to you the wisdom of all the ages, and you transform it into weapons. Morrison's face was fixed, because the universe is not the peaceful paradise you people have conned yourself into thinking. If you stay holed up in your crystals, and your philosophy for years, having no contact with the outer world, then you'll lose the conception of what things are like out there in reality. Out in the galaxy, it's still a matter of living or dying. It's still a matter of power. Zephyrinine made an effort to keep her voice under control as she replied, "Every species goes through a phase of conflict. That's part of the maturation process. But ultimately, they all come to understand. Cooperation and the sharing of knowledge creates monumental results than does war and competition. That's why the library exists, to help species make that shift much faster." Morrison laughed, a hollow sound. This peaceable little enlightenment story will be turned on its ear if somebody comes along with a bigger stick. You've made yourself a galaxy of sheep, Keeper. Beautiful, intelligent, philosophic sheep, but sheep all the same. The remainder of the day was taken up with conversation, Morrison describing the extent of human military ambition. They would not be satisfied with the status of junior members in a community of peace. As far as the rest of the galaxy was concerned, the emphasis on cooperation meant an open field. Such opportunities, they felt, should be exploited while they lasted. The knowledge gained from the library was to be used to create technologies that could give humanity a decisive edge over species which had long ago abandoned all military capabilities. The revelation not only jolted the library itself, but also shook the entire galactic community. For the first time in ages, defenders of the library were faced with a crisis that called into question their most cherished beliefs about knowledge and progress. A number of species met in emergency session as they tried to understand how strangers, who would be invited into their peaceable brotherhood, might become a threat to it. The first measures taken were brief and determined. The library's access by humanity was revoked, and all human researchers within Vorthaki space were expelled. Crystal of Access was retrieved, its quantum signatures wiped from the phone's memory. Ambassador Morrison and her team departed the galaxy at once, with orders never to return. Yet the harm had already been done. Over a period of months, the humans systematically downloaded and saved everything they could put their hands on. They hadn't reached the deepest treasure houses, but still accrued enough advanced knowledge to jumpstart their military development by hundreds of years. And they got chapter and verse on the defensive capabilities, or vulnerability, of every major galactic civilization. The Andromedans, whose society had been based on art and culture for 50,000 years, had not even the ghost of a military. The Centauri had advanced shields, defense fields in passive mode, and much besides. But they were so far removed from thinking strategically that it would be child's play to coordinate any joint assault against them with their logical minds. The Tauri, who could not even imagine deliberately causing harm to another sentient being. As reports poured in from every corner of the galaxy, the full scale of the crisis became clear. Humanity were not just busy producing new weapons, they were planning for conquest. The outer systems of peaceful civilizations were probed by intelligence-gathering missions. Human settlements sprang up at key points of vantage, strategically placed around the galaxy. Military installations in disguise as research stations were started in various sectors. Dr. Elena Busquez, who had seemed so earnestly excited about Pew research, was now working a team of physicists on what intelligence reports called reality disruption weapons, which were based in large part upon the advanced physics she had studied at the library. Dr. Marcus Chen was serving as strategic advisor to something called the Human Expansion Command, using his knowledge of galactic history to identify the most vulnerable governments for early conquest. The irony was biting. Through the Keepers, humanitarists, the accumulated wisdom of millions of years, exactly with the idea of trying to encourage them in their next stage of evolution beyond the bloodshed and warfare that had held them back before. Unfortunately, they had only provided human beings with the means to develop these qualities further and to turn them upon their friends. Zephyrinine felt she was in the deepest winter of her long life. The library used to be a beacon of hope and progress. Now it was a monument of simple, foolish idealism. No minds that had been beyond the need for war for so long ago could not comprehend minds which sought knowledge as mere another weapon to wield against each other. Session after session, the Council of Keepers sat in long debate. Some suggested closing the library altogether, no more knowledge to fall into wrong hands. Others recommended some form of galactic defense, though none of them had expertise in military strategy. A few even submitted that approaches be made to humanity. Grant them access to more knowledge and offer peaceful intentions in return. However, that last option disappeared when human attacks became the first reported assaults. The Andromeda 9 were attacked without reason. Warning ahead of time, human warships, using weapons developed from the stolen technology, managed to break the simply constructed defensive systems of the And. There went a few minutes' time. So these Andromedans, who for millennia have sought beauty and sought riches beyond compare, now faced an enemy they couldn't understand at all. The same picture was repeated all over the galaxy. Civilizations that had never progressed beyond elementary defense systems suddenly found themselves completely overmatched by human military technology. Regardless of the technical details, however, the weapons in themselves were terrifying enough. Energy cannons which shattered planetary shields like eggshells. Quantum torpedoes existing in a multitude of dimensions, simultaneous with reality, disruptors capable of unmaking matter at its most basic level. Moment. The real crushing blow was the way they used them. Humans didn't ever go on random attacks. They had thoroughly checked the sociological and psychological backgrounds of their prey from library, and knew exactly how to make each race give up easily. They knew which species valued individual life the most, and went after those life forms specifically. They exploited whatever cultures were based primarily on collective consciousness networks, and formulated weapons which could scramble brainwaves. They found out what other civilizations would slacken just to keep their relics safe, and wherein lied those civilizations' primary objects of desire. It was warfare raised to a high art, using millennia worth of accumulated wisdom as a tool for conquest. The humans were not simply winning their wars. They were systematically ripping the very roots of Galactic civilization itself out by its eyes. Kantari with their logical minds. The Centauri attempted to find a mathematical solution that could both benefit sides. Humans had a different response. They sent over an emissary with their realization disruptors to unmake one of the moons above, Centauri Prime, and then demanded unconditional surrender. The Tauri tried an empathetic approach, hoping deep within their own human consciousness there would be some trace of mercy. The humans followed up by using PSU war techniques learned from other empathic species, turning the Tauri's own assets against themselves. In only 2 years of more than 30, away from the library, humanity had taken or terrified well over half the galaxy. The peaceful order which had existed for millions of years vanished before an enemy that knew exactly how to exploit those very virtues they themselves had created there. Zephyr9 watched the destruction unfolding on the maintenance levels, once more feeling like a physical blow every time one of those worlds signaled surrender. There were daily reports now of ancient civilizations which had been subdued, of centers of knowledge which had been scorched, of philosophical traditions breaking beneath the straitjacket imposed by human military governors. By human military governors, the worst part was the realization that she and the other keepers were partly at fault. In their eagerness to share knowledge, they promoted the greatest disaster in galactic history, every weapon that ripped through peaceful shields. Each strategy which brought down enlightened governments, all of it based on the information gathered in library. As Al, the innocent peacetime populations of myriad star systems, looked on, and was powerless before Nadot, when individual representatives of human forces arrived in the Vortharki system itself, things were forced to a head. The Keepers had always assumed that their homeworld was invulnerable, supported as it was by its inaccessibility and the cosmic respect that the library commands. They had never imagined that mankind could look upon the library as anything less than a sacred charge, to be taken over and run for profit. The human fleet that entered Vortharki space was unlike any other ever seen anywhere in the galaxy. There's no other way to put it. Giant dreadnoughts which curved space around them, smaller ships that passed in and out of dimensions, weapons platforms vibrating with controlled energy. At their head was a ship which the refugees saw and recognized with terror. Hughes Morrison. After the ambassador who first penetrated the library's mysteries, there was a patch of light that appeared on the main screen, which told them that a transmission was coming in from the human flagship. Zephyr9 found herself once again facing Ambassador Morrison. But now Morrison was wearing the uniform of Admiral of the human fleet. The woman's face had been set over the past several years into one of iron authority and brute force. "Can you hear me, Keeper Zephyr9?" Morrison began, speaking as someone having absolute authority. "I am here to give you a choice. Present the library to us intact, and your race may continue to serve as its trustees under human guidance. Resist, and we'll take it anyway. But your kind will then be counted among those forces which have opposed the lead that humanity is destined to take." The threat was evident enough, yet Zephyr9 felt untouched by it. "You can't effectively control the library, Admiral. It's more than a storehouse for information. It is also a living consciousness that acts in accordance with purpose and intent. It will not serve the purposes of those who would use knowledge for destruction." Morrison's smile became icy. "I'll see about that. From your own archives, we have learned a lot about manipulating consciousness. If necessary, we are rather adept. Quickly, the conversation cut off, leaving keepers to formulate their final decision. They could surrender. Maybe human control would be less terrible than human destruction. But they could also fight. They were a peaceful species and had no weapons beyond the self-defense capacities of the library. There was a third possibility. A decision which had been discussed in whispered conferences over the months. A council of keepers gathered in the library's most remote chamber, beneath ancient consciousness pulsing with extraordinary aptness where it had grown from the humble brain of an ocean planet. The famous thinking process would not only determine their own future, but also the future of all knowledge in a galaxy where power was increasingly in the hands of people who treated it only as a tool. We have one chance, Zephyrinine pronounced in tottering words that bore down like the weight of eons. The library has grown beyond what its creators intended. It is in multiple dimensions and quantum states, linked to everything that has ever been. We can throw out that knowledge into space and time where no single species can take hold of it ever again if we engage the ultimate protocols. The proposal was both radical and irreversible. As they knew it, the library would be gone. Its vast residue of thought patterns turned into forms which might take thousands of years to recover. Species would learn at length and slowly to understand their knowledge, instead of just plugging into a central storehouse. It would set back galactic civilization by incalculable years, yet long later, this too would be seen as a blessing. For no one group could ever again use the collected wisdom of ages as an instrument of power. The first to speak was Ultra 7, the most ancient of keepers. In my 20 centuries of service, I have seen knowledge bring light to the darkest corners of ignorance. Yet now that same knowledge is changed into instruments whose purpose is oppression. Maybe wisdom should just go back to being natural again, something that has to be earned, not passed along, something this struck a chord with each keeper. As lots had been drawn sense of agree given birth to cake, it was nevertheless least known among them all that there were higher considerations at work. The library had been created as a means of serving all sentient life, and should not now be enslaved by any single faction, as human forces readied to make assault on the keepers began their work of dispersal. Ancient protocols, long buried within the library's labyrinth of consciousness, suddenly became alive. These were systems designed to safeguard against just such an occurrence as now threatened. Therefore the knowledge began to fragment itself, spreading out across dimensions and even timelines, embedding it in reality's very structure. To human senses, the process appeared as the increasingly intense pulsing of the library's crystalline structure. Admiral Morrison ordered a full assault, attempting to stop whatever the keepers were doing, but to no avail. Already it was too late. Human ships found themselves moving through the library's outer defenses, like gossamer constructions of light and memory. When the human forces entered the central chambers of the library, all they found were empty crystal shells. The keepers had lived there, quiet and peaceful, merging their whole consciousness into disseminated knowledge rather than see it enslaved at that point. As Zephyrine's individual awareness vanished in favor of this widespread tapestry of knowledge wisdom, she had faint hope that one day future generations might prove wiser than those who had gone before. The humans of Earth had won an empty victory. The library remained, but now it was only the physical structure, being architecture alone, without those who had given it life and meaning. Zephyrine's body lay against an information wall, its mechanical systems silent. All the knowledge they had come to take was gone, scattered beyond hope of recovery. Admiral Morrison reeled down the wide corridors and ponderously climbed their mathematical spiral staircases to the central nexus where her own younger self had received crystal of access. Now surrounded by like a ghost, every room filled with empty echoes from 11.5 billion years. But the story was far from over. The Keepers had shown surprising wisdom in their final act, realizing that knowledge seeks out consciousness as if it were water looking for the lowest place to collect. The disseminated wisdom began to re-emerge, but in an unexpected form that no military force could control. Young beings began to dream of maths theorems they had never studied on worlds throughout the galaxy. Artists discovered techniques long lost and flowed in their minds as they worked. Scientists experienced sudden flashes of insight which carried them a century ahead with understanding. Knowledge was returning. But as a seer, it was a bit conditional. It responded to a sincere intention only, freely flowing to those who sought to create, and remained forever beyond the reach of those who would use it for destruction. Human military researchers discovered that their stolen weapons, design fragmented into incomprehensible pieces, while human philosophers and genuine scientists found themselves with new advances opening up before them in every direction. In the decades that followed, humanity began to break up into these two basic types. Those who had pursued the path of conquest found themselves more and more isolated. Their weapons would not hold up. Their plans went astray, as if the very cosmos itself, began to work against violence. Meanwhile, a new type of human being began to emerge, creatures who approached knowledge with the awe, humility, and respect that Keepers had always hoped for. This new generation was represented by Dr. Sarah Him. Born after the fall of the library, she grew up in a galaxy where knowledge had to be earned through genuine understanding rather than simply taken from records. Her research into quantum consciousness resulted in leaps of insight her predecessors never had achieved. Not only was it that they just never thought along lines of discovery like these before, but also because she approached these issues with an uncorrupted mind. The keeper of the library never arrived. It was some generations after his death that Dr. Sarah Him, whose dissertation on quantum consciousness made for many insights which prior people in her line of work couldn't had possible, had come hither by virtue only precisely because she was, without any stolen wisdom as a corrupting influence to heighten insight, made contact with scattered fragments of what had been Keepers' consciousnesses. This summit between them and Dalek's master race took place in no physical location at all, but rather catered towards thought. The house of numbers, where number as life forms structures, living or dying meaning. The voice that spoke could have been Zephyrnine's, or perhaps all of the Keepers speaking together. We remember you. We remember your race as it was, and we see how it could be now. The choice between these two roads is entirely up to off people. When Kim split the stone in, two pebbles spattered outward, and most landed at her feet, where Anaguana knew them well. One larger, whiter pawn thunked on the head of a fat green caterpillar. Kim, didn't you scatter my knowledge, so give me another chance. Your job now is to earn wisdom by dint of hard struggle. Keeper, said the consciousness, wisdom cannot be taken, only knowledge can be wrested away by force. But true understanding can be achieved only through eating bitterness and bearing it without regret. It also has to come from your own heart's desire. Ping, your species has the possibility of either great wisdom or monumental self-destruction. Which road you follow will not only decide the outcome for yourselves, but affect every intelligent creature. In this galaxy, the future of consciousness throughout our entire universe. With the conversation, a new chapter in galactic history was begun. Slowly, cautiously, a few human beings began to remember the principles that had once governed the library. They learned to approach knowledge humbly rather than arrogantly, and seek understanding from its own sake, not for any potential power it might bring them. Their recollection spread that the most impressive discovery's mind was humankind's from not itself, on other people, but linking rather downward into them. The process was neither fast nor easy. The human military establishment struggled to maintain its control, perceiving the new mindset as a done deal. Wars persisted across different areas and systems in the galaxy as rival claimants to humanity's future wrangled over which direction their species would ultimately take. Nevertheless, slowly but surely, the Keeper's copiously scattered wisdom began to take effect. Cao Shaho, Tajeding Chunshula, when the AIs were destroyed, the nanotechnology responsible for them also disappeared. Returning humans found desert where once rich the fields and forests had been. But the rest of life went on Asa. But that had been caused by there were other species, those that had survived the initial human conquests. They began to notice a new atmosphere in it as well. Like those Andromedans who had been driven into hiding in the furthest reaches of interstellar space by us, were the first beings outside Earth to discover any human effort at genuinely empathetic and understanding art. But as luck would have it, straightway the Tory felt that music embodying increasing emotional values would echo inside the human heart. The Atlantis also detected signs of change, seemingly even the logical. Centauri were watching types of behavior among humans, suggesting that some of them were finally learning to think out past their own immediate self-interest. Contact was slowly and gingerly renewed, under strict protocols designed to probe the true intentions of any human who wished again to be part of the galactic community. Dr. Kim was among the first to undergo this testing, as she subjected herself to long lengths of further deep psychological examination, while giving years of dedicated service, showing her peaceful intent to seek knowledge and teach others how best they could learn and grow. The new library, when it was finally established, bore little resemblance to its predecessor. Instead of a single repository controlled by one species, it was a hive mind extending out across the stars. The rewarded were those who came ready to learn. The hidden were those who came with unfound intent to abuse. In this way, the Keeper's last sacrifice left behind a thing stronger than had been seen before, and also, perhaps wiser. Admiral Morrison, now old and watching her effort to build something like a military empire, were on the verge of collapse, remarking, once more made contact with the new network. Over many decades, she had been trying to regain the knowledge which had dropped out of human control, and while a feat strategy upon impotence device started mount into metal mesh with rust and self-conceit, went down into swampy places near as useless as her weapons. The universe would not respond any longer to principles that guided her whole life. The answer came in a sort of telepathy, not verbal conversation. She looked at herself as they saw her, an intellect led by terror and greed on the path of destruction, from its first flushes of ambition. But in it, she also saw things she might have been and things her species still could be. Knowledge isn't power, the voice of scattered wisdom spoke in her mind. Knowledge is responsibility. Understanding isn't domination. Understanding is relationship. Wisdom isn't ownership. Wisdom is service. In her final years, Morrison became a student for the first time in her life. She approached the library not as a battlefield, but as her own self. not for weapons, but for wisdom, not to conquer or control, but instead understand. The data that flowed into her mind was quite different from what she had once stolen, deeper, richer, a piece of pattern connected to the fundamental patterns of all living consciousness that bound together. What she had become, and what someone might become who once represented their species' worst impulses, formed an expression for mankind's potential self-cultivation. Her example, though it did not shine until the end of her life, inspired a new generation of human philosophers and scientists who chose wisdom over power, understanding instead of mere predominance. The galaxy that emerged from this transformation was different from what had gone before, more complex, more resilient, independent awareness. The scattered wisdom of the original library had taken root in countless minds throughout time and space, joining together at last to perform greater things than any one part might do alone. Fused with the sphere was Zephyrine's consciousness. She felt deep satisfaction, knowing that her individuality had survived. Seeing this work around her, the final penny dropped, and the mysteries of the keepers were all of a piece. Their deaths were worth it after all. They had made consciousness evolve itself and develop new ways of protecting knowledge by choosing to scatter it rather than let it be enslaved. The end result was born by nature a final lesson, and had to be learned through bitter experience only that some things mankind most desires can never be taken by force, because human beings themselves must find genuine understanding to see. Wherever there is knowledge, there will always be consciousness. Wherever wisdom flows love, and where understanding comes true, meaningfully connects those who make good choices in their lives out of intent with deep thought, kindness of heart. So, it was that humanity did not enter the galaxy as conquerors, but rather just one species accepting its function in a complex universe. The library had been destroyed and revived. The keepers had given themselves over to immortality while still remaining intact. An entire galaxy learned that most profound of all transformations quite often arises least expectedly from the greatest losses. Consciousness chose patience, humility, and love to serve as the soil where wisdom would lie. In that ever-yawning burst of understanding finally achieved, not only was knowledge able to give other creatures that shared there, but where all creatures with consciousness everywhere funneled into this vast and incredibly complex play, *, which is existence itself.